evening. So I understand originally you're from Barry in South Wales, but you no longer reside there. So how come you left wonderful Barry?
Yeah, I left my hometown about 18 months ago now to move up to pastor a little church in Herefordshire, in the village of Wellington. So, yeah, it's exciting. Moved across the border to England, to a rural setting. So very different, but yeah, glad to be
Is
here.
life very different in England than Wales? Is it much different?
Quite a bit in the countryside, yeah. I've lived in South Wales, in a big town and in cities like London. So coming to the countryside has been a bit of a culture shock, but it's one that I'm really enjoying, actually. I'm getting used to it and embracing country life.
That's fantastic. And do you have family?
Yeah, I'm married to my wife, Carla, and we've got 5 children. So, yeah, 2 boys, 3 girls. So that's kept us busy during lockdown alongside the church ministry.
Yeah, that's going to keep you very busy. What age are your children?
So my 2 lads, Kieran and Ruben, my eldest is Kieran, and he's 15, and then Ruben is 14, and then the 3 girls are Sienna, Ellie, and Lucci. Their age is 11, 6, and 4.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, yeah, busy times for you then. Yeah, pastoring a church and a young family. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife's got a harder job than me. She's homeschooling at the moment. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's tough for her. So you're now a pastor of a church, but I mean, was that your childhood ambition?
No, far from it. It was the very last thing on my mind as a child. All I ever wanted to be as a child was a footballer. That was my ambition. We never spoke about God in the home. So even going to church was a bit weird when I was a kid. It was weddings, funerals, christenings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So would you say your family would not have identified as Christians? Your parents?
They would call themselves Christians, yeah. So
right,
and because I was christened as a baby, any forms that we filled in, we would always put Christian on the forms. But there was no mention of God or Jesus or why we put that. It was just we live in a Christian country, so therefore we're Christians and we hold to similar values to what the Bible teaches. So we're good people, therefore we must be Christians.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's definitely my upbringing as well. And what about your upbringing in Barry then? What was it like to live in Barry as a youngster?
Yeah, Barry's changed quite a bit. So back in the 80s, when I grew up there, it had some troubles with crime. And it wasn't the worst place in the world to live. We were brought up in the poorer side of the town. But that was just normal to us. We didn't feel that we were missing out on this rich life. We never went without food or anything like that. There was always food on the table, but we didn't have kind of luxuries in that sense. And if we did, it was a massive treat. So to go out for a meal or to have a takeaway or something like that, that was a big deal. But yeah, it was good times and bad times in my childhood, and the town itself has seen a huge change in recent years, and it's become a bit more of a cosmopolitan town, really, being linked so closely to Cardiff.
And does your family still live there? Your parents live there and other family members?
Yeah. So my mum still lives there, still in the same family home. But sadly, my mum and dad divorced a few weeks after I left home. So I've not actually seen my dad in over 10 years. I don't know where he is at the moment. The last I heard, he was living in Cyprus. He did remarry, but then we lost touch. So I'm not entirely sure where he is now.
But you were saying as well that growing up, one of the things that you really enjoyed and were obviously very good at was football. And so how did that come about? How did you get into football in the first place? Did you just knock around with your friends and discover you were good? How did that happen for you?
No, my dad made me play, and I didn't want to play really until I was about 6. And back in those days in Barry, the youngest football team were under 10s, just local league football teams. And my dad drove me to the training session, Barry Sports Centre, and he just said, "You're going football training tonight." And I cried, didn't want to go, because they're all big lads. They're all 4 years older than me. I just felt like a little midget. So I was the smallest, the weakest, the slowest, the worst. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what to do. And I think I must have kind of come on for a little bit at the end of matches now and again when they were winning anyway and it didn't matter. But then as I got a bit older, probably 8, 9, I started to really enjoy it. But I carried on playing with lads that were older than me. So I got used to playing with older lads, and it really pushed me and tested me. And it got to the point when I was about 11 when things then started to change and football became quite serious. Yeah.
So at what age did you get involved with Swansea City, playing for them as a junior?
I was 12, and I'd been training with Cardiff City, and Swansea kind of nipped in and said, "Would you like to come down and see our setup?" And there was a great guy called Ron Walton, and he was like the youth, not manager, but he oversaw everything in the youth setup at Swansea. And the first team manager was Jan Mulby. I grew up as a Liverpool fan. My uncle always made me watch the Liverpool games, and so he was a bit of a legend to me, and I was in awe of him. And that had quite a big sway in me agreeing to then sign schoolboy forms with Swansea. I took a bit of stick from my family and friends who are big Cardiff City fans. But going down to the Vetch and having those experiences at Swansea, things were starting to get more serious. And again, I was playing with lads who were older than me. So I was playing with the under-18s when I was 12, 13. And they just treated me so well, really, really well. And Jan Mulby pulled me aside. I remember one day, I just couldn't believe that he knew my name. I was just so excited, so in awe of him. And then he said that he had plans to put me in the first team by the time I was kind of 15, 16. And they wanted me to sign this long contract. And I didn't really take it in at the time. I just kept thinking, Jan Mulby's talking to me. This is so cool. But then in the weeks after that, when it did sink in, I was just overwhelmed, just so excited that this, local lad from Barry could potentially sign for a professional football team. Yeah, really exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine that was really, really exciting. I mean, I remember Jan Mulby. I mean, he was quite a big guy, wasn't he? A big unit. And I also remember, the thing I remember about Jan Mulby is that I think he's Danish, but he sounded like a Scouser, didn't he? He sort of really adopted the Liverpoolian accent. And so I always remember that about him. But that must have been a bit amazing. Yeah, someone like Jan Mulby talking to you and seeing something in you.
Yeah,
but
it was.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe every young boy's dream, really, to sort of have these opportunities. But it wasn't. I mean, obviously, the Cardiff Swansea thing was bad enough. Obviously, being Wales, especially if you've got Cardiff fans in your family. But then other clubs as well began to take an interest in you. Is that right?
Yeah. So there was a rule at the time that you couldn't go to an English club until you were 14. So when I was between the age of 10 and 14, I was playing for Cardiff Schoolboys. And I was fortunate enough then to get selected to play for Wales. And when you get to that kind of age of 12, 13, the English clubs are unofficially keeping tabs on you and watching you, but they're not allowed to approach you or your parents. No scouts are allowed to make any contact at all. But there was one team that didn't quite keep to that rule. And there's always rumours and always kind of little comments that come back to you. Your manager will tell you, "Oh, look, you've got some teams watching you, so make sure you have a good game today." But Crystal Palace were a bit more forthright and didn't quite keep to the rules strictly, and just flat out approached my parents and my manager of Cardiff Schoolboys and said, we want Kristian, we're going to sign him, but we'd like to bring him down to London. And they brought my parents down, and they said, we'll put you up in a hotel and we'll just show you what we're all about. And it was a bit cheeky, but it worked, because they were a team that kind of yo-yoed between the Championship and the Premier League. So their budget in comparison to Swansea was worlds apart. My parents were being put up in 5-star hotels with spas and meals paid for. I was being whisked off here, there, and everywhere, invited into the first team changing rooms, meeting all the stars that I grew up watching on TV. And it was impressive, really, really impressive. And they invited me then to go up and play unofficially on a Saturday, and it was against Arsenal. And I remember seeing the kit hanging up in the changing room before the game. So I was 13 years old, and it was the proper kit. So it was the proper Adidas kit, and Arsenal, who we were playing against, they were wearing the proper kit as well. And I'd never played in a match like that before. So at Swansea, you wore the kit that was like 3 or 4 years old. So this was just a small thing, I know, but to me at the time, it was a big thing. This was like, this is the real deal. This is it. This is the proper shirt. This is proper football. And it then got to the point where Crystal Palace said, look, we know what Swansea have offered you. I don't know how they knew that, because I didn't tell them. And we want to match it. So we want you to sign this long-term contract. So not just a 2-year schoolboy form, but you sign the 2-year schoolboy form, and then we want you to turn pro when you're 17. And they just put this contract in front of me and said, you can sign it on your 14th birthday.
Wow. I mean, this must have been amazing. What an experience. They say to actually be sort of with the team at Swansea was great, but then to go to somewhere like, you say, like Palace, who opened your eyes up to all these other things and opportunities before you, and wanting you to sign a contract was amazing. But I understand as well that it wasn't only Palace that was interested in you. There were a couple of other teams as well that were interested in you.
Yeah, so I found out after I'd signed for Palace that there were a few teams kind of waiting in the wings for me to turn 14. And then they were planning on inviting me up and doing it the kind of the official way that they should have. And those teams kind of resurfaced their interest when I turned, I think I was about 15 or 16, so a few years later. And in those couple of years that I'd spent at Palace, because I left home at 15, and they wanted me to go and move to London a year earlier than scheduled. So I stayed with a family in London. We just called it digs. I didn't kind of realize and appreciate the extent of it. A little bit nerve-wracking leaving home at 15. But they were a lovely family who were paid to look after me. And in those couple of years, we got to travel the world, really, playing for Crystal Palace and play for Wales. And those other teams that had kind of been keeping tabs on me then made it quite clear that they were ready to sign me. So that the two main contenders were Tottenham and Inter Milan. And it was coming back from a tournament in Italy when Steve Coppell was the first team manager at Palace. And I just started training with the first team a little bit. And he pulled me in the office and he said, I heard you've done really well in the tournament, and you must have done quite well because Inter Milan have just got in touch and they want to sign you. But I've told them that you're not available at any price because we've got plans for you here. So that's the end of it. We'll draw a line under it and get your head down and work hard. And I was a bit overwhelmed by the Inter Milan comment because my favourite player was Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo, and he was playing for them at the time. And I thought, how cool would it be to be in the same team as him? But then I was excited they were interested, but then I was disappointed that I had no say in this. It's like my dream had always been to play abroad, especially in Serie A. And I just felt a bit frustrated was the first time I'd felt like that I wasn't in control of where I played. I thought that I got to decide, if a club shows an interest and I want to go there, I can go. But I realized that I couldn't. There was more things at play. It was more complicated than that. I was owned in many respects by Crystal Palace. And that didn't sit well with me at all.
And I mean, it's just amazing, isn't it, to think, like, say, you came from Barry, and then ended up with Swansea, and then into London with Palace, and then Inter Milan are after you. I mean, and at such a young age, that must have been quite mind-boggling, really. But an interesting comment you made there, Kristian, about you felt owned. Do you feel like, as a footballer, you were seen more as a commodity rather than as a person? Is that how it works?
Very much so. When you're playing well and you're in the team and you're an asset, then everything's rosy and the club can't do enough for you, and they'll treat you and they'll spoil you. But as I would find out in the not too distant future from this moment that I'm speaking about, when you're injured and you're of no use to the team, you're not treated in the same way. Yeah. You are, or you at least feel that you're cast aside because you can't do anything for them. So, well, we're not interested. And that's very frustrating. And I know I'm not the only one to experience that, far from it. But and with the money as well, the kind of money that's being thrown around and the figures, you come to realize then that you're being purchased. And then if you're being purchased for a vast sum of money, then the owners and the club, they would feel that they have the right to treat you the way that they want and then tell you what you should do. And it's a complicated dynamic sometimes.
Yeah. Well, leaving aside the fact that you should have signed for Spurs, because I'm a Spurs fan, we'll put that to one side. That would have been a much better move than thinking about Milan, in my humble opinion. You just mentioned there something was going to happen that was going to sort of cause a halt to all these dreams and ambitions that you had, and you suffered an injury. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was actually Tottenham that I was playing against at the time. And David Pleat was the youth development officer at Tottenham. And they had also made an approach to try and sign me. So they were one of the clubs that had shown an interest. And David Pleat had spoken to my mum. And he told my mum that they were definitely going to sign me, that they were going to give my mum a six-figure sum, and which would pay off her mortgage, would change her life. And then when I turned, I think it was 17 or 18, they would give me quite a lot of money as well. They thought that they would get me on a bit of a deal, and they didn't envisage it costing more than £1 million. So at the time, I'm 16 now, and the wages that they offered were obscene. I think it was quadruple what my mind was boggled. And I didn't know what to do. My agent was going nuts because he just wanted me to sign for Tottenham. And I just needed some time. And ironically, we came up against Tottenham that weekend when this was all going on. David Pleat was there. I watched him as we got on the pitch. And I just passed the ball out wide, made a run into the box, and I went over on my ankle. Seemed like an innocuous thing, really. Nobody near me. And I did hear a crack. I'd never broken a bone in my legs before. I was pretty sure something was broken, and it was. I'd broken my ankle. But that wasn't the main problem. The break healed within a month. I'd actually torn the ligaments in my ankle, and those ligaments would never re-knit back together. So I ended up being injured and on the sidelines for somewhere between 6 months and a year. And some physios said you need to kind of at least consider that this could be the end. But I didn't listen to those comments. I couldn't listen to that because all this good stuff was happening to me. And it all come through football, and I just couldn't bear the thought that my career could be over. It hadn't even begun as far as I was concerned. But I just never got better. I never healed. And I started this process of lies, really, because I could feel like my grip on my football career was just falling away from me. And so I decided my plan was to say that I was okay and just play through the pain, and I would be okay. I just needed more time. That's what I kept telling myself. And so I convinced the youth team physio that I was getting better and I was okay. And she would kind of manipulate my ankle and press on certain points and say, does this hurt? And I'd say, no, it's fine. Or it was excruciating. And I was taking too many painkillers. I was doing silly things to try and numb the pain. And I tried my best to play with this injury. I got a slightly bigger size on my right foot to allow for the swelling, because it would just swell up every day after training, especially after matches. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the same player. I just couldn't do the things I could do before physically. My mind was still there. I was still sharp in my thinking, but I just couldn't turn as quick. I couldn't jump as high. I knew I couldn't go into the tackle as strong because my ankle was just like chocolate. It was just weak. And then Cardiff City came in for me. And they'd come in for me a few times in the past, but when you got Inter Milan and Tottenham knocking the door, you don't really pay much attention to a second division team. But Palace said I could go for free. They didn't want any money for me. Steve Coppell had long gone at this point. There was a new manager. Don't think he'd ever even watched me play, but the physios must have told him. And I was gone. And I signed for Cardiff. So I was 18, 19 at this point. So I went home. It should have been an exciting moment, but it wasn't really, because I knew it was the beginning of the end.
So how on earth do you deal with that disappointment? I mean, you got all this before you, or all this excitement of playing for your country, for top teams, and then suddenly that's just taken away from you. I mean, what does that do to you mentally?
I didn't cope. It ruined me mentally, and I completely lost the plot. And I battled on at Cardiff for about 18 months, and eventually the physio there, he was on to me. He knew I was finished, and he gave me some good advice actually. And he said, "There's more to life than football. Don't put yourself through this." He said, "You might want to give it a go semi-pro, and just train a couple of times a week, play on a Saturday." But he said, training every day, it's just not going to happen. So I cancelled my contract with Cardiff, and I signed for Newport County, and I took his advice and tried to play, but I lost the plot. I completely lost the plot. And I'd met a girl in school back in London when I moved there. So she was 14, I was 15, and we'd been together for the whole time. And she left me because I was just a horrible person to be around. I was bitter, I was angry, and I just didn't know what to do. I was drinking a lot, and I was in a dark place. Thankfully, she came back, and she was the one that got me back on track and convinced me, look, that physio that told you there's more to life than football, he's right. You know, we can get married, we can have a family, you can get a normal job. And she admitted that she'd always hated football as well, which I found quite funny, because a few of my friends and family had been worried, you know, does she really want to be with you, or does she just want to be with you because you're a footballer? Well, that was put to bed straight away, because she said, I was with you despite the fact you're a footballer. That put me off you. And that was quite overwhelming, because this was the first time in my life I'd felt that I'm being treated well, and there's somebody who wants to be with me for me, not because of what I can do on a football pitch. And I thought, this is amazing. This is really good. And I kind of bought into that we could have a life outside of football. And that was the first glimmer of hope, really. Yeah. So that was...
So obviously, Kristian, football's gone for you, and all your hopes are in being a professional footballer in the future. But that's gone by the wayside. So now you've got to start life again. You've got Carla alongside you, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, so Carla got a job in sales, and the guy who recruited her, he was honest and said, look, I get 50 quid for every person I get on this training course. Kristian, why don't you come on the training course as well? And then you can have the week together. All your food's paid for, you stay in a hotel. You don't have to worry about the job, but you do have to sit in on the training course. So I did that and ended up carrying on and working for that company. So I started a career in sales that would go on for the best part of 12, 13 years. And it was something that I never, ever envisaged doing. And I was very, very different from the typical salesman. But I ended up running the sales side of the company and training all the new recruits on a very different way of doing sales. That wasn't, in my opinion, wasn't so cheesy and wasn't so aggressive. And the company is still going strong today. Yeah. So, very different to professional football.
And you were very successful at that as well, weren't you? And you sort of made quite a bit of money. Is that right in that as well? So you kind of maintained that lifestyle that you had as a footballer in some way. You were materially wealthy.
Yeah. I'd invested the money that I'd earned from football into putting a deposit down on a house. I'd blown the rest on rubbish. But that was the only good investment I'd made. So we got on the property ladder quite quickly. And then with earning a good wage in the business side of things, we pretty much had whatever we wanted. So we'd got to the point where we had quite a large home. We had our own gymnasium in the home, a cinema room, we had more bedrooms than we knew what to do with, really. And yeah, life was very, very comfortable. If we wanted something, we bought it. If we wanted to go on holiday somewhere, we went. So it was kind of like the footballer's lifestyle, but without football. And on the face of it, I think I probably appeared to most people to have it all worked out. And I know there were lots of friends of mine who were a bit jealous. And, you know, I was married with kids and I had everything. But it wasn't exactly what I was feeling inside. I was still bitter, I was still angry, and I was still frustrated. Yeah.
Well, there's going to be another change, wasn't there? So it seems like you managed to move away, at least outwardly, move away from the disappointment of football and make a success of your life. But then something else was going to happen. Carla began to go to a mother and toddlers group at a church, and she became a Christian, and that was going to challenge you again. So just explain what happened there.
Yeah, so Carl had been going to this toddler group and I didn't think much of it, really. I just thought it's where you take the children, have a coffee and have a natter with the other mums. And I thought that was that. But they kept inviting her to different events, the people in the church. And she agreed and went along to this event where a lady was sharing her testimony. And I remember her coming home from this event and she was just different. And she kept going on and on about how amazing it was. And she wanted to read passages from the Bible to me. I just thought, this is weird. She's lost it. And she said, where's that Bible that one of your customers gave you? Because I used to have quite a lot of Christian customers and they'd often try and give me Bibles or leaflets or try and get me on an alpha course or something. And strangely, I never threw them away. I threw them in the cupboard. I never read them, but I kept them. And I didn't really know why. And Carla went into the cupboard and grabbed one of these New Testaments and started reading these verses from John's Gospel. And I just remember sitting there in bed thinking, why are you reading this to me? What are you expecting me to do? Say, wow, that's amazing. I've seen the light. It was just weird. But what I couldn't deny was over the next few weeks and months, Carla changed. And, you know, I still loved her. She was still the girl that I met in school, but there was just something different about her. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. They were tangible things, like she was more patient. She forgave people in her life that had done pretty bad things. And it was like I wanted what she had. She was more content as well. So whereas before she was a bit like me, that whatever we had, she always wanted more. Never, ever satisfied, never content with anything really. Cars, holidays, house. But now she had this contentment. She had this peace. And I thought, I want that. And she said, well, you've got to come to church and you've got to read the Bible and you've got to know about Jesus. And I said, well, no, I don't want that. I want the peace side of it and I want the contentment, but I don't want the church and I don't want the Christianity side of it. I'm totally not up for that. But she broke me down. And eventually I caved in and thought it'd be quite a nice thing to take my children to Sunday school. And so I went along to church. Lovely people, really friendly, very welcoming, but I didn't really get it. I didn't feel that I fitted really with the people. They were really like nice people, good people. And I thought, I'm not. I'm still bitter. I'm still angry. I'm not a particularly nice guy. So I don't really fit in with these people. I'll come along, I'll bring my kids, but that's as far as we'll take it. Yeah.
So what changed? Because obviously now you're a pastor, so I'm assuming that you became a Christian. So what happened for you?
Yeah, so I'd never really understood the sermons. So that was the bit I kind of just switched off when I was in church. And then one day, the pastor of the church, Merv Neal, was preaching. He'd been going through Corinthians, and he was teaching on how to be a godly parent and a godly husband. And I just remember feeling this conviction that I wasn't either of those things. I wasn't a good dad because I thought I was, because I would spend so much money on my children, but I never spent much time with them. I worked away a lot of the time, and I thought, oh, well, I'll make up for it by buying them this. That's what makes me a good dad. I thought I was a good husband because my wife had everything she'd ever dreamed of, but she didn't really have me. And I just felt this deep conviction. And then in that moment, Carla remembers me having tears running down my face. I don't remember crying, but I remember knowing in that very moment that God was real. And I didn't feel like a lot of Christians describe this moment of peace and joy and love and all those things. I didn't feel any of those emotions. For me, it was quite different. I felt scared. I felt pretty petrified, actually. I'd known times of fear, times of fear in a big match, times of fear in my childhood. I was pretty afraid of my dad growing up, but this was different. This was a fear of knowing for certain that if I died that day, I wasn't going to heaven. I knew that for sure. And I'd always thought, if there is a heaven, I'll probably go there because I'm not a murderer, I'm not a rapist, I don't abuse children. So therefore, I'm not one of those horrific people. I'm just a normal guy. Yeah, I've done bad things, but not as bad as them, so I'll be all right. In that moment, I knew I wasn't all right. I knew that even the stuff that I thought was small, the small mistakes, that was a huge offense to God. And I didn't know what to do about this experience. And I was pretty shaken up by it. And I said, I said to Carla, I can't go back to church. It rocked me. And the church was praying for me. And Carla was begging me to come back to church. And a few weeks later, I eventually did. And then I got to experience a different side of God and Christianity. I got to hear about the forgiveness in Jesus. I got to hear that, yes, if we're not repenting of our sin, if we're not sorry, if we don't turn from that, if we don't come to Jesus, then no, we're not going to go to heaven. We have done wrong in our life, and it is an offense to God. And outside of Jesus, there is no hope. But hearing more about the cross and hearing more about what Jesus had done, that God had sent him to live the life that we couldn't live, but then die the death that we should have died. And he's taken the punishment for me, so I can be free. There is hope. That was when the release came. That was when I did experience the love and the joy and the peace. And I had that contentment then that Carla had from the beginning. And everything changed.
So are you saying, Kristian, then, as we come towards the close for the interview, are you saying then that if you were to die tonight, you'd go to heaven for sure?
100%, absolutely certain. I know that if I died now before the end of this interview, I'm going to be welcomed into heaven. Not because I'm suddenly a good person now. I've trusted in Jesus. I haven't changed in that sense. I'm still guilty in and of myself. But God will welcome me into heaven because of my faith in Jesus, because of him, not because of me. Yeah.
And a final sort of question then for people that might be listening is, obviously you had lots of things that this world offers. You at least, materially, you had lots of things, both as a potential professional footballer and then as a super successful salesman. And those things didn't really satisfy. And, why do people need to come to Jesus? Isn't it enough just to sort of live a good life, be good, just enjoy the world? Why come to Jesus?
I think the main thing for me is Job has been the most helpful book in the Bible, with me getting over the bitterness and anger and frustration side of things. Because there's this line in Job, and it says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. So he says, naked I come into this world, I came in with nothing, and I'm going to depart with nothing. So it's like, whatever we build up in this life, we're going to leave behind. So we can hold on to it for a certain amount of time. So if we have a long life, 100 years, great. We go, it's gone. With Jesus, it's forever. Heaven is forever, and forever's a long time. And I think, what would we rather? Would we rather a short-term obsession with the things of this world, but spend an eternity apart from heaven? Or would we rather a time where it's not that we have to go without everything, we have no joy and pleasures in this life, we do. But our focus is on heavenly things. And with Jesus, he can never, ever be taken away from you. And what he promises can never be taken away. So, yeah.
Kristian, thank you so much for sharing with us on Real Lies. And we pray that the Lord would bless you in your ministry as a pastor in Hereford. And just continue to use you mightily in his service. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks, brother. Soon as well, you never know. But anyway, Tom, it's over to you. If you could just explain a little bit more about what it means to become a Christian, Tom, we'd love to hear. So over to you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, everybody. Wasn't it great to hear Kristian's story then, and how his life was just changed and transformed by God? And I wonder, as you were listening to his story, I wonder if there were any parts of his life that you can really connect with, that you can really resonate with. Maybe it's that feeling of disappointment, of being offered so much, and then in the blink of an eye, it being taken away, and you've lost all hope. Maybe it's that feeling of bitterness inside, of envy, of anger. Or maybe it's the part of the story where Kristian shared about how his wife Carla became a Christian, and as soon as she'd become a Christian, she felt the need to read the Bible to Kristian constantly, to tell him, you need to come along to church. You've got to hear about what God has to say for you in your life. Maybe you can connect with that, because maybe tonight you've got a friend or a family member or a colleague who's a Christian and said, you've got to come and hear the good news of Jesus. You've got to hear about it. And so you've come along, but there's one big question in your mind. It's the question that Kristian had, is why on earth do I need God? What do I need God for? Well, we're going to think over these next few moments a bit about that question. A few weeks ago, it was the BAFTAs, and I don't know whether anyone followed the BAFTAs or watched it. For those of you who don't know what the BAFTAs is, it's imagine the Oscars, but a better version, because it's just the British film and television. And at the BAFTAs, there was a guy named Noel Clarke who won an award. Noel Clarke, you might know him for starring in Doctor Who about 10 years ago as Doctor Who's sidekick's boyfriend. Not one of his most prominent roles, but he's had much bigger acting roles. And he won this award a few weeks ago. He won the award for Outstanding British Contribution to the Cinema. It's a big, big award. And he went to make his speech and he gave all his thank yous. And then he ended with an empowered speech. And I think hopefully, Dave, we're going to watch this speech.
To end this one a little bit different. Sometimes you'll feel like it's not achievable. It is. Sometimes you'll feel like you're not good enough. You are. And sometimes you'll feel like you don't deserve it. You do.
Well, what about that for a message, right? Isn't that what you wanted to hear tonight? That is the kind of news that you want to hear in your life, right? Yeah, I am good enough. I am good enough. I can achieve whatever I want to achieve. You know, it's the worldview that many people hold in the world. They, you know, all that I need is within myself. I am a good person and I can achieve greatness and I deserve a good life. And if there's a heaven, well, I certainly deserve to be there one day. The thing is, Noel's story doesn't end at that speech. Literally like 2 weeks later, he's making the news headlines again. In fact, every single main news channel was broadcasting this because multiple allegations of sexual harassment and abuse were made against him. Sky dropped him, ITV dropped him, his acting union representatives dropped him. Viewpoint, which was the TV drama he was starring in, were meant to show their season finale, the biggest episode of the show. And the news came out and they scrapped it. They didn't even show it. And the BAFTA that he'd been working his whole life for, that he reckoned he deserved, that he's achieved, well, that BAFTA's been suspended now, and there's a huge amount of pressure on them to rescind it and retract the award. You see, reality has come crashing down for him. The truth has been found out, and his life is in ruins. His hope of a future is gone, surely an acting future. You see, as great as Noel Clarke's speech was, that speech that we'd like to believe, we'd like to think that we are good people, that we can achieve and we deserve anything, even heaven. Well, what unfolded in his life revealed the truth, and the truth is this. Sometimes you'll feel like it's not achievable. It isn't. Sometimes you'll feel like you're not good enough, You're not. Sometimes you'll feel like you don't deserve it. You don't. Why do I need God? Surely I'm fine without him. Well, the Bible says otherwise. The Bible says, actually, you can't achieve God's requirement of perfection. You fall short of God's standards. You might think you're a good person, but the Bible says no one is good, not even one. And if we're honest, we know it. We know that we've lived our lives in rejection against God. We've rejected God. We've rejected God's way. We've rejected his rule. We've even rejected his very existence. And so what do we deserve from God? Well, we don't deserve anything good. We don't deserve heaven. Actually, the reality of it is if the Bible says if you live a life in rejection of God, then the payment that you're making up for yourself, the wages of that sin is death. And not just a physical death, but an eternal death, eternal separation from God and all of his goodness. It's a bleak and awful future. And that's the reality. And you're probably thinking, I'm going to click off right now. I don't want to hear this message, because I much preferred what Noel Clarke said at the end of his speech. Yeah, I can be a good person. Why on earth do I want to listen to what you're saying now? Maybe your reaction is a bit like what Kristian shared about when he heard and this fear came upon him. And he said to Carla, his wife, I'm never going back to church. No, I'm not going back to church. I can't face the reality of my sin, of my brokenness inside. Maybe you're not thinking now, why do I need a God? Why do I need God? But maybe you're thinking, why do I want there to be a God? Surely it's better for me to just live my life hoping that God doesn't exist and deceiving myself that I am a good person. Well, please don't click off or stop listening, because we're getting to the good bit now. This is the good news, the great message. It's way better than Noel Clarke's speech. Why do you need God? Well, let me read those verses from Romans to you again. It says this: when we were utterly helpless, when we were powerless, Christ came at just the right time, and he died for us sinners. Now, most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. You see, the reality is we are powerless. We're helpless, we're broken by our sin, and we're heading towards a lost eternity. But God loves you. He loves you so much that he didn't just sit back and watch. He stepped into this broken world. He left his majesty for the manger, and he lived a life on this world, a perfect life. God became man in the person of Jesus, and he lived that perfect life that we can never achieve. And all the while, we were rejecting him. We didn't want to have anything to do with God. And yet, you know where he went? Because of his love for us. Jesus went to the cross. He faced a death that he didn't deserve, the death we deserve. And he hung on that cross because he loves you and me. You see, at any moment, he could have stopped it. At any moment, remember, this is the same person that spoke and the world came into existence. Yet he willingly went through the nails, the whipping, the beating, the crown of thorns crushed into his head. And worst of all, what laid before him was God was going to put the sin of the whole world upon him. He faced the punishment for our sin, the death we deserve. And he did it so that we can live. And he sealed that victory 3 days later by rising victoriously from the grave. He'd conquered sin. He'd conquered death. He'd done something that we could never achieve by ourselves. And he's done that so that if we trust him, if we ask Jesus alone to save us from our sin, if we ask him to forgive us for the way we've lived our lives, well, then we can be made new. We can be transformed. We can be changed. We can be made right with God. Our relationship can be made right. We can know our Creator. See, the sentence of our sin has been paid in full at the cross. And through Jesus alone, we can have life and life to the full. We can have joy in abundance. We can have a peace that surpasses all of our understanding. And we can have a future hope of heaven that no one can ever take away from us. You see, Noel Clarke's speech, it sounds great. It sounds great that, yeah, we are good enough. We are great people. We can achieve whatever we want, but it faces the brutal reality that we're not. But the good news of Jesus is this. Sometimes you'll feel like you can't achieve it, but Jesus achieved the victory for you. Sometimes you'll feel like you're not good enough, but he is. Sometimes you'll feel like you don't deserve it, but that's the beauty of grace. God in his love offers a free gift of eternal life for you if you'll simply put your trust in Jesus. Why not trust him today? If you've not already, why not? Put your trust in Jesus today and have your life transformed. I'm gonna close now with just a short time of prayer. And it's going to be a prayer of commitment, an opportunity for you to put your trust in Jesus, perhaps for the first time. Maybe you've never heard this news before. Well, today, why not pray this prayer with me? If that's something that you want to do, just like I say, pray it with me. Repeat after me. You don't have to be out loud. It can be in your own heart. God will hear you and he will answer your prayer. Let's just pray as we close. Lord, I am sorry for all of the sin in my life. Thank you for sending Jesus to die on the cross, taking the punishment of my sin and rising 3 days later. Please forgive me of my sin and take control of my life. And it's in Jesus' precious name that we ask this. Amen. Well, guys, hopefully that was a blessing to you tonight. And I hope that it's maybe got you thinking. And if you prayed that prayer with me tonight, for the first time, if you put your trust in Jesus, then don't stay quiet about it. Please get in touch. If there's a Christian that invited you along or sent you the link or whatnot, tell them, first and foremost, tell them that you've put your trust in Jesus. But we'd love to hear from you as well. And so you can get in touch by going to reallives.net. And on that website, there's a contact us page, a little form that you can get in touch with us. And we'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to send you a gift, a free gift of a short part of the Bible, or John's Gospel, for you to read. And also we might send you some other books that would be helpful for you too. So please tell a Christian, tell someone. It's great if you have put your trust in him today. Back over to Roger. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Tom. Yeah, we'll send you a lovely New Testament, actually, if you get in touch. So please do ask. Thanks very, very much, Tom. Now it's over to you to ask questions. You know how to do it via Slido or via the text number. But Janice, I think you should be receiving them and you'll pose them to Kristian and Tom. Janice, over to you.
Thank you, Kristian and Tom. Kristian, let's go back to the early days. As a young teenager, how many hours a week would you have spent playing football?
Wow, a lot. So it would have been once a week with my local team, once a week with Cardiff schoolboys, and then twice a week with Cardiff City, Swansea City, when I was at home. And then as soon as I moved to London, it was pretty much every day. Yeah.
So what happened to your education when you were spending all this?
My mum is a very sensible and wise woman. So it was my dad pushing the football, but my mum insisted that I carried on in my education. And fortunately, Crystal Palace offered to put me in a school in London, and then they paid for a private tutor because my mum insisted that I did my A-levels as well. So I was able to do my A-levels in English, literature, PE and maths while I was playing football. There was only 2 of us that did A-levels, so it wasn't high on our agenda of things that we wanted to do. But yeah, it was a blessing.
So you're still very young when you were injured. You had physios looking after you physically and medics. Did anyone look after you psychologically or socially, or were you just left to get on with not playing football?
Yeah, just left to it, really. Nowadays, football, I can't speak for all sports, but I know football in particular is much, much better at helping young sports people when they struggle. So there's more in terms of psychology and support, general support. It's something that I may delve into in the future to help, especially sports people who have to retire young through injury, because it's so common that depression, anger, frustration, even suicide in some cases. So nowadays it is getting better, and men generally are getting a little bit better at speaking. And there's been a bit of a stigma about men opening up and saying, I'm not in a good place, I'm struggling, I need some help.
So when you stopped playing, did you still actually watch football, or were you sickened by watching other people doing what you felt you should still be able to do?
I went through phases. So there were times where I couldn't bear to watch it, and there were other times where the obsession was still there. That was what I knew, and I had some good friends who were still playing at a very, very high level. So it was split feeling. I was pleased for them and I wanted to support them, but at the same time I would often feel that should be me.
Somebody would like to know that when you were selling, what did you sell?
I was monitored security systems is the technical term. It's kind of like an alarm system that's linked in to a centre who would contact the police or the fire brigade or ambulance if necessary. So yeah, it was quite interesting actually.
I've been bullied by Roger into asking this question, obviously. Roger understands that having become a Christian, you sold your house and gave away the money. Is that true? And why did you do it?
Yes, kind of. When I first became a Christian, I felt like God was calling me to do two things. One, preach, maybe be a pastor. I didn't want to do that, so I put that on the back burner for quite a while. But the other thing I felt like he was calling me to do was to get rid of all the material stuff, just to get rid of it. And my church at the time needed some money for a renovation, and so my wife and I prayed and decided we'll sell the house, we'll give the money to the church. We reckoned that we give them somewhere between £50,000 and £70,000, and we couldn't sell the house, so we ended up reducing it and taking all of the collateral out of the house. And the guy that bought it, well, he looked as if he'd won the lottery when he come to look at it. He couldn't believe it. He said, "Why have you just reduced the price? This is now within my budget. This was my dream home." So I started telling him about Jesus, trying to witness to him. But it turned out he was a local pastor, and he still to this day uses that house for prayer meetings. He stores, I had like a triple garage thing, and he uses that to store furniture, and he gives it away to people in Barry who can't afford furniture. So yeah.
So it was a win-win then.
It was.
So as a church minister, do you miss the big salaries and the money? I presume you don't get paid anything like Wellington Chapel.
Yeah, it's just silly things really. Like I never worried about things like the car going in for a service or an MOT, or having a puncture, or the renewal of your car insurance or house insurance, or a big bill to repair on your home. Yeah, it sounds really arrogant really, but I just knew that there was enough money in the bank to cover all that stuff. Whereas when I kind of come into ministry, it's you're praying a lot about those things, but God's always provided. I've never ever gone without. My kids have had food on the table, clothes on their backs. So yeah, I'm grateful, and I still like some designer clothes now and again, but I'll buy them from a charity shop rather than these designer shops.
Thanks. I'll give you a break for a minute. I'd like to just ask Tom a couple of questions, if I can. Tom, why are you so sure that there is a heaven and there is life after death?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think I would say, because I've got a pretty good source for my answer, because the person that tells me there is a heaven and life after death is Jesus, and he's the only one that's conquered death. He's the only one that rose again from the dead. If someone came back to life and told you about there's an afterlife and there's heaven, you'd probably think, oh, well, maybe we should listen to them. And Jesus in his life showed that he was the Son of God. He truly was. But his resurrection, his rising again from the dead, really seals it for me. And you look at the evidence for the resurrection, and it's overwhelming. It sounds crazy. How can someone come back from the dead? And surely heaven sounds a bit far-fetched and wishful thinking, but when you really look into it, when you look at the evidence, you'll see actually that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And if he really rose from the dead, then maybe we should listen to what he's saying. Maybe we should start listening to him.
There's a question from somebody who's appreciated Kristian's story and it's really made them think, but their life has caused them to have a lot of bitterness that they can't get rid of. How would you suggest that they find help?
Well, Kristian probably has a better answer for this than I do, but I mean, I would say it's similar to what I was saying in my message. The world says we can fix all our own problems. Everything that we need is within ourselves. But really, we're never going to fix that problem of bitterness in your heart, because it's a problem with your heart that only the great fixer of hearts can mend. And I would say that if you come to God, if you bring it to him, then he can change your heart. He can help you with that problem. But maybe Kristian's got something else to add to that. I don't know.
Okay. Kristian, do you want to add anything?
I think I go along exactly with what Tom said. And the only thing to really add to that is the way that the Bible speaks. It's very much like put off bitterness and anger and all these feelings that we all experience as human beings. But the Bible's not just kind of telling us off and saying, get rid of that stuff, because we can't. We can't do it on our own. But instead, God says through the Bible, put off that, but put on this. And it's this idea of taking off our dirty clothes and our dirty feelings and our wicked heart and put on what Jesus has earned for us. Put on the love and the patience and the joy and the peace. So it's like we're putting on Christ. And it's his spirit within us that enables us to do that. We can't do it by ourselves. Exactly as Thomas said, it's impossible.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions in one now. One, does your church have a football team? And do you still play at all? And would you encourage your sons to be professional footballers?
My church doesn't have a football team, unfortunately, but a 5-a-side team we'd be hoping for one day. We'll have to look into that. I don't play anymore. Sadly, my injuries are too severe for me to get back on a football pitch. They have been for some time. I played occasionally in a charity match and a couple of church matches, but I just have to be careful. I have done a bit of coaching when I've had time. But as for my sons, my one son does actually play for Hereford United. So he had a game today, and he's a very, very gifted footballer. Both my sons are actually, but my eldest is not really that into it. But yeah, I would be happy for them to pursue that, but I would always want them to have a plan B and to see that there's more to life than football or any other sport. So whatever their career is, whether it's football or anything else, that their identity is not wrapped up in their career. Their identity is in Jesus. So if anything else gets taken away, if work goes pear-shaped, you still got Jesus. So your life doesn't fall apart. Just a part of it is changed.
Do you think there'll be sport in heaven?
Yes, although I can't imagine playing it without sinning.
As a pastor, how would you counsel a young person who's dividing their time between church and sport, and the latter beginning to take a bigger control over their life?
Yeah, this is really difficult today, especially because lots of sports are played on a Sunday, and young people are having to make that decision. Do I go to church or do I play my favourite sport? I'll give you just one example. My son, who I mentioned, who plays for Hereford, when we moved up here 2 years ago, he had been training with the Cardiff City Academy, and the football was always on a Saturday back in Wales. We found out that in Herefordshire, all of the football is on a Sunday. So there was no way that he could get into a local team unless he stopped going to church. And he said, I'm not going to do that. So he loves football, but he also thankfully loves Jesus. And so I asked everyone in the church to please pray, because the only way that Reuben could play football on a Saturday
was if he played at county level. And the problem is all the scouts for Hereford go and watch the local league football. So there was no way of him getting a trial. In his first week in school, there was an after-school football training that he went to. And the coach asked to speak to me at the end, and he said, look, your son's done really well tonight. He said, I'm actually a coach for Hereford United, and we got some trials coming up, and I'd like Ruben to come along. And he went to those trials. Praise God, he got in, and they play their matches on Saturday. So I think honouring God, putting God first, putting church first, God will honour your sporting career as well. And then there may be times where you have to make some compromises, but if it is a rare occasion, you have to do something on a Sunday, you can always go to the evening service and then make up for it in other ways. But I know a lot of Christians in football who struggle with this.
Mm. That's an encouraging story there. I'm going to finish with this one and hand back to Roger. What did you learn from your time as a footballer and as a salesman that's helped you most in your role as a pastor?
I think as a footballer, what helped me is seeing people who have everything on paper. So you look at Instagram, Facebook, the magazines that they're in, the television interviews, they look so happy and so content. And you've got people who are so envious of them, and yet they're not completely happy. They're not content. More and more, we're hearing stories about top sports people who are deeply unhappy and depressed, feel empty. And so I've learned that as a pastor, even if I see somebody walking along the street, or they live in the local village and they've got nice clothes, lovely car, they go on great holidays, good jobs, they look like they're happy and they're content. Appearances can be very, very deceiving. There's probably a lot going on under the surface. As a salesman, the number one thing that I would teach the new recruits was that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that you're to use them in that proportion. Too many salesmen talk too much. And as a pastor, that's been a skill that I believe has helped me so much. You know, I'll sit with somebody. I sat with somebody on yesterday, and they were speaking to me for about an hour. They just lost their gran, deeply upset. And at the end, they gave me a big hug and thanked me so much for all that I did. I did pretty much nothing. I just sat there and I listened. And sometimes that's all that people want. That's what they want most. They want to be heard. And God will listen. And we can spend hours upon hours pouring out our heart to him. And he's always there, and he'll always love to listen to us.
Thank you, Kristian, on behalf of all of us on Zoom and all of us watching on YouTube. And I'll hand back to Roger.
Yes, thanks, Tom and Kristian. Really, really interesting evening. So next week, God willing, 8 o'clock, same place,
Sorry, you're muted, Roger.
I'm sorry about that. Right.
What was that
Thank
web
you very
address?
much to Tom and to Kristian. Really, really helpful. Next week, then, Noel Tredinnick, the conductor of an orchestra and the choir master, great character, really is. And the week after, 2 weeks tonight, Vicky Holland. What an unusual lady, and what a fascinating story. So we've got some really good stories coming up, not only for these weeks, but we hope to start again in the autumn. We might have a week or two's break in the summer, you never know, but certainly in the autumn we'll keep going. And we've got some great stories already in the can. If we can help you at all, if you'd like a New Testament, do get in touch with us at reallives.net. And don't forget those books as well from 10ofthose.com. But thanks for listening. Oh, one other thing, we've got Gus Eyre to sing us out tonight. So Gus, over to you.
Read me a line in a letter you'd written, all of my world tumbled down. How could I refuse ever to listen when you have been so good to me? I remember the time so clearly and often, buried deep down in my soul. Treasure of life made my heart soften Lord, you've been so good to me. You've been so good to me, so good to me. Lord, you've been so good to me. You open my eyes, I clearly see. Lord, you've been so good to me. When it all rolls down and the author walks onto the stage, then the world will bow down to the King at the end of the age. So glad I read me a line here written. You loved me so much that you gave your one precious son to a cross and a tomb. Lord, you've been so good to me. You've been so good to me, so good to me. Lord, you've been so good to me. You open my eyes, I clearly see. Lord, you've been so good to me, so good to me. You've been so good to me, so good to me. Lord, you've been so good to me. You open my eyes, I clearly see. Lord, you've been so good to me. Yes, Lord, you've been so good.